Hi, my name is Keith Knuth, and I'm going to do a demonstration on how to call an API from an Ion workflow. A few things to make clear. Ion is a component service of Infor operating service, or Infor OS. Ion acts as a system integration platform. It includes a workflow tool and an API gateway tool, which we'll both use today. And any Ion workflow model can include a step to call a REST API in that API gateway. Let's take a look at how to construct our workflow model. I'm in Ion Workflow. I navigated here from the app switcher, choosing Ion Desk, then Monitors and Workflows, and Workflows, and then click the Add button to bring open the modeler. I'm in the modeler, and I've done a couple things. I've given a name and description here, and so I can collapse out this left-hand menu and this left-hand menu, and I'm left with just my model. You can see ahead of time, I've also added 4 parameters to my workflow: load time, URL valid, URL, and website up. These are 4 parameters that I know I'll need to use to interact with my API. First step is to drag the Ion API step onto my modeler, like so. When you do so, it'll be highlighted, and the properties panel will list the properties for that step. It's already given me a name for the step. I can use that default. But now I need to choose the API that I'm going to work with. I press the select button. And in another YouTube video, we talked about how to add a third-party API into the API gateway. A link to that video is going to appear in your upper right-hand part of your screen in case you need to go watch that. But that same API that we added in that video is the API that I'm going to use in this demonstration. The name of that was from a vendor called Neutrino. There it is. And I can hit the search button to get all of its operations for that service, but I know that the one I want is called URL info. There it is. I'll select that API. And now you can see that API is listed in my properties panel. The next field to use is the service account. This is the IFS user account that will be used to access this API. So normally a human is involved where they're using an application to call an API, and so their own credentials that they have logged into the application with are used to call the API. Here, this is an automated process where there is no human involved, so we have to tell the process what account to use. To do that, you click on the user menu and user management. You may not have permissions to do this. A security administrator would normally have the role that's required to do this step. If that's not you, that's okay. Just call your account administrator and ask them for a service account. They're going to do this step for you. Under Manage Service Accounts, they'll click the Add button. Now I can put in the description, used for automated Ion process, and then a username that I want to associate this account with. Click Save. It will download that account file to my local PC. And now I can go back to Ion Workflow, press the Import button, select that local file, click OK, and now I have that service account specified. With that setup complete, I can move on to the next tab. Here you can see that this API uses 3 input parameters. We know this because Ion Workflow has connected to the API gateway, read the specification for this API, and displayed them here. The only required input is the one with the red asterisk by it, the URL. And so I'm going to map one of our workflow parameters called URL. That's the URL that the system specified or a user specified when they launched the workflow, the URL for the API to check. On the next tab, the input body, this particular API does not have any inputs into the body part of the request. So again, we know this because Workflow has read that specification, and so it has grayed out or disabled those fields from input. On the Output Parameters tab, this is where we'll define the data coming back from the API and what workflow parameters will store that data in. We'll leave the response content type set to JSON. We'll define it saying that the response will come from the body, and the path is the JSON path, since this is JSON text coming back to us. A JSON path is kind of like XPath if you've ever dealt with XML data. If you are not familiar with how the syntax works to specify a field, for example, we're going to do $http-OK to specify the http-OK field in the main part of the body. If you don't know how to work with that syntax, check out jsonpath.com. It's a website where you can paste in JSON, and it will help you figure out what the path is to a field that you're looking for. We'll check this as optional just in case no data comes back, and we'll map this to the workflow parameter website up. We'll add a second one, also from the body. This one is $load time, also optional, and we'll map this to load time. And then the last one, also in the body, $valid. And this one always comes back. It always has a value in it, so I don't have to click the optional tab. And we'll put that in the URL valid field. We've got all of our data mapped to come back now. We'll go to the test tab. In the test tab, we can see that we put in a URL. I've got that defaulted from the default value in our workflow parameter. I can just hit the test button. And now you can see workflow immediately called the gateway, called the Neutrino API in the gateway with our value, and it said, yes, that website is up. The load time was 0.15 of a second, and the URL was in a valid format. Now, for example, you could play around with this a bit more and remove the HTTP and try test again. And you can see that, no, this particular API requires the HTTP when specifying the URL, or else it's not going to come back. And you can try other websites, other formats, other URL types to make sure they work before you deploy this workflow. On the last tab are the runtime settings, and this just helps you control what happens if there are errors. So your retry time and the timeout, if the API doesn't respond, can be controlled here. So the setup of the API call is done. We've tested it to make sure it's working. All we need to do now is save this workflow and activate it, and it's ready to use whenever we want. Now, this is very simple. It's only one step. You may want to do more complex things. For example, I may want to put a decision parameter after this and check to see if that load time was over a certain amount, or if the website wasn't up at all. And if it wasn't, maybe I want to assign a task to someone on my IT staff to go check that server and that website to see what's wrong with it. And once they figure out what's wrong, they can hit approve, and we can go back and maybe make a second API call, make sure that the issue's been fixed by the IT staff. I could have a second API call here in here too, and check website after website after website in an automated process to make sure all my sites are up, maybe during the middle of the night or at a certain time, to make sure everything's running successfully, and then assign off any problems to the respective personnel and different teams to handle those websites being down. Just an example of how to use an API from the Ion API Gateway in a workflow model. If you need more information on the topics we covered, take a look at the Ion Desk Administration Guide and the Ion API Gateway Administration Guide, and of course campus.infor.com for live and recorded training.